Marshall. We'll start with our fiscal analyst, Kyle.
Good afternoon. I am Kyle Anderson with KLRD, and we are going to first talk about the State Fire Marshal. The Office of State Fire Marshal is charged with handling the code, our fire code, and some of the emergency prevention and natural disaster response across the state, including a search and rescue team, and the industrial safety and fire prevention teams are tasked with inspections for preventing fires across the state. Investigation team is tasked with determining the cause of various fire incidents across the state. The expenditure table there, the approved request from SB 125 was for $11.4 million. The revised request this year is for just over $12 million in fiscal year 2026 and just under $12.7 million in fiscal year 2027. The agency does not receive SGF monies, typically speaking, and the overall all funds portion of the budget accounts for less than 1% of the state's overall budget. On page 2, these two tables provide a snapshot of the supplemental and enhancement requests of the agency. The first set of 4 items there for fiscal year 2026. The first supplemental is a request for an investigations pay plan of $294,254. An emergency response assessment for $150,000, a fire prevention inspector for $116,690, and an IT employee for $87,457. In fiscal year 2027, the pay plan increased and the 2 additional employees are again requested. The pay plan increase in fiscal year 2027 would be for $3,594. The IT employee, $85,489. The fire prevention inspector, $83,319. And the last request there is for $500,000 transfer from SGF to the Fire Marshal Fee Fund to provide for volunteer fire department protection equipment grants. Moving to page 3, this is a 10-year snapshot of the agency. You can see that since 2023, the agency's budget has been rising some. This is predominantly due to expansions of some of the efforts of the agency and associated reorganization impacts. The breakdown on page 4 splits the 10-year history into the categorization of state operations, capital budget, state aid, and other assistance. So you can see that predominantly their budget is in state operations with a small amount of state aid, which is predominantly related to the volunteer fire department grants that the agency has operated on. The individual categorizations of expenditures are broken out on page 5. I will draw your attention to the our third from the bottom line item for capital outlays, the equipment furniture line. I would like to note that while equipment and furniture does not sound like it would also include automobiles, the vehicles the agency operates and replaces also fall under that to balloon that amount. The state aid packages are laid out on page 6 in terms of the expenditures therein. And then on page 7, there is a breakdown of the by program agency assessment, as well as the different funds that the agency operates under. Page 8 begins the 3 fee fund analyses for the agency. The major operational fund for the agency is the Fire Marshal Fee Fund, which is predominantly funded by insurance premium levies. And one of these intricacies of the Fire Marshal Fee Fund itself is a requirement to reserve half of the budget for portions of the year. So deposits for the account only come in June and December. So between those spans, they have to have roughly 50% of their budget to operate between the 6-month periods. On page 9, there's information about the boiler inspection fee fund. And this is predominantly funded by the boiler inspection and certification fees of the agency. There is a fee schedule for the boiler inspection fees and recertification fees associated with that. The details for the actual fee schedule are on the Kansas what's the word I'm looking for? Regulations that are in the footnote at the bottom of the page there, 4949-1. The elevator safety fee fund on page 10 is the last of their major fee funds. Similar to the boiler inspection fee fund, the elevator safety fee fund is predominantly funded through the inspection and certification fees of elevators. The fees for elevators also include licensure for the people that actually work on and install elevators. So the associated fees of those are listed there in the paragraph. And page 11 begins the actual fiscal year 2026 and fiscal year 2027 analysis. The first line item there, the SB 125 appropriation without reappropriations was again for $11.4 million. The items 2 through 5 are the supplemental requests from the front page snapshot. So digging a little bit more deeply into those. Item number 2 is, again, the investigation pay plan increase of $294,254. And the agency is seeking to introduce a career progression plan that would align their salaries and wages with the career progression plan of the Highway Patrol. The agency has a little bit more extensive requirements for special agents than some other law enforcement agencies, and as a result, the recruitment and retention of special agents is a little bit more difficult when they can be scalped for greater pay at another law enforcement agency. So they are seeking to implement the same pay plan as the Highway Patrol to make recruitment easier and retaining recruited special agents easier. Item number 3 is the emergency response assessment for $150,000. And the agency is looking to conduct an emergency management and threat assessment of the state to determine the needs of emergency response and the capabilities of the state to try and more efficiently use state resources. Item number 4 is the fire prevention inspector for $116,690 in one FTE position. And the agency is seeking to implement a fire prevention inspector specific to the Board of Regents. The Board of Regents institutions are now having their inspections done by the agency again, and the resulting increase in travel costs and contact time is creating a drain on some of the other special agents. So they are seeking to introduce a particularized inspector for the Board of Regents specifically. Item number 5 is the addition of an IT employee for $87,457 in one FTE position. And the goal of the additional employee is to streamline operations for the rising number of mobile connected devices that the agents have to use in the field and the associated troubleshooting load that adds to their other IT staff of 2 FTE positions. The addition would bring them to 3 FTE positions in their IT division. And item number 6 is all of their adjustments of $4,988 and 5.5 FTE positions. The FTE positions is really just a correction from a jumbling of numbers from the last year budget request. In the reorganization of the agency, there was a shuffling of where their FTE positions were housed within the divisions. And in the budget submission last year, the FTE positions associated with those changes were removed from the budget, but the funding for the positions was kept in since the positions existed. And so the positions are filled within the agency, but the FTE allotment was removed for those positions. So the agency is just trying to realign the number with the actual number of FTE positions that they employ within the agency. Any questions for fiscal year 26?
Thank you, Kyle. So turning back to page 5, under commodities, the clothing line. So just help me understand. It's exactly 500,000. So I assume that it is to do with the volunteer fire department grant. But this looks like 2026. So I could be wrong.
That is, I think, actually a different set of materials. I believe all of the volunteer fire department grant stuff should be under the aid to locals instead of commodities. So I would have to check with the agency about the details on that one for you.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions for Kyle? All right, Kyle, we can go to FY27.
So, moving to page 13, I will note that because the comparison of the budget is to the fiscal year 2026 approved, some of the additions, like the IT requests for supplementals in 26 will recur in 27 because of the ongoing equal comparison. But the first line item for fiscal year 2027 is the removal of the one-time volunteer firefighter equipment grants that were added in by the legislature last year, and have not yet been approved for the fiscal year 2027 budget. But item number 2 is a request to reinstate that volunteer fire department grant with a $500,000 SGF transfer. Item number 3 is, again, the investigation pay plan increase to introduce the Highway Patrol's career progression plan for their special agents at the fire marshal. And in fiscal year 2027, that would come to $305,944. The additional IT employee request in fiscal year 2027 to handle the increasing mobile device connectivity issues is $85,489. And item number 5, the fire prevention inspector for the Board of Regents institutions is $83,319 in fiscal year 2027. Of note, the Special Committee on State Building Construction removed all supplementals and enhancements. So items 1 through 4 in fiscal year 26 and 2 through 5 in fiscal year 2027 are not currently in the SBC HB 2434. Item number 6 is professional scientific equipment, an increase of $347,000. And this is a request to purchase a crime scene laser scanner, replace some technical equipment for the investigation group, and replacing deficient equipment within the investigations group. Item number 7 is a request to replace some of the special agent trucks for $321,000. Notably, there is a statutory requirement and regulatory requirement to separate the gear that is contaminated in an investigation from the cab of the vehicle. So all of the clothing and instruments have to be separated into the bed of a truck, closed off from the cab of the vehicle that the agent is actually returning in. Item number 8 is contractual services of $286,150, including $279,825 from the Fire Marshal Fee Fund. And this is predominantly associated with increases to insurance premiums, training conference expenses, computer services, communication services, and building rent. Item number 9 is a commodities increase of $79,290, including $26,240 of the Fire Marshal Fee Fund. And this is predominantly for replacement of consumable equipment that the investigations and inspections team use. Item number 10 is replacement of a passenger car for $29,000. And the inspectors do not require the separation of gear in a truck that the investigators do. So they are able to travel in standard saloon cars. And this is a replacement for one of those. Item number 11 is a decrease of information processing expenditures of $277,000. And this is predominantly associated with the completion of the National Emergency Reporting Incident System implementation that took place in fiscal year 26. And item number 12 is all their adjustments. Again, the recorrection of the 5.5 FTE positions to realign with the actual number of employees they have. And the associated cost increase is predominantly associated with the cost indices increases for fiscal year 2027. Any questions for fiscal year 27?
Representative Resman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For 2027, for the fire prevention inspector, shows $83,319. That's for an employee?
Yes, sir.
Okay, but then in 26, it shows for the fire prevention inspector for a full-time employee of $116,690. Why is there a difference in 26 and 27 for the same position, but there's such a great dollar amount difference?
Yeah, so when the agency first hires a person, the onboarding expenses and training expenses of that employee are more expensive in their first year than in ongoing years. So the additional $34,000 in fiscal year 2026 is associated with the onboarding and training cost of the employee.
So in 26, that would be for a new employee. In 27, it would be for a new employee.
The new employee would start in fiscal year 2027 or 6. The fiscal year 2027 position is just a continuation of that same added person, not an extra person.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? All right. Thank you, Kyle. We will move on to the fire marshal.
General?
No, we'll have the presentation. Thank you. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Kyle. Chairman, Vice Chair, Ranking Member, thank you for allowing me to speak today. I'm going to get my presentation up here. And hopefully I can answer some of the questions you raised during the prior portion of this and kind of tell you where we're at. Some of the issues that were raised just now have been addressed already in the bill. For example, the money that's going to the volunteer fire departments for that program is in your base bill at both the Senate side and the House side. And what the plan is in that is to take additional money that we have in our fee fund and place that, give us authority to spend that on the program. And I think that's something we can do for a few years while we have some overage in that fee fund. It's not a long-term answer to it, but if that's what it takes us to get through some of these fiscal times that we're dealing with, you know, we can work with that. So that really, unless you guys really wanted to work with SGF out of that, I think we have that covered. One of the questions you had was about clothing and the $500,000. So what happened was we looked at that grant and we realized that we were losing money because what we were doing was having those fire departments, these little departments, go to vendors and each get individual bids for this. And the bid numbers, when we would get them back, they varied all over the place, you can imagine, right? So, but we were just reimbursing them at whatever that cost was. We didn't go in and say, no, there's a contract or whatever else. In the meantime, once we came in and I won't call it administration, once we came in and looked at that, worked with our fiscal department to say, there are existing state contracts where we can directly purchase this equipment and we can provide it to the department at less cost. Therefore, we're able to provide more to more agencies. And so that's what we have gone to. So therefore, you'll see that when it's all classified, it's no longer aid to agencies because we're not giving them directly the money. We're purchasing the gear on their behalf, and it's going out to them. Does that make sense? So it's just kind of a way that I asked the same question before we came over today because I was looking at some of those numbers specifically. In our presentation, you'll see page 22 has a chart where it shows that there's no money in that aid to government for the last few years. That's why that is. That also, the page 22 chart shows that really the increases that we've seen in our budget are really based mainly on increases that have been through the pay raises. You'll notice that, and fringe, the majority of the increase has been in that area. And it's good that we're taking care of our folks. So let me get going here through this. I'm going to kind of skip over our mission, try to keep things going. We have reorganized our office now for about a year ago to make sure that we were putting enough emphasis on our prevention duties and child care and the hospitals and all the different things like that had kind of gotten bogged down as we took on additional responsibilities such as boiler and elevator. So we created a separate division for industrial safety. We have a person who then oversees that group, and that's broken away from prevention so they can really look at the fire safety side of things and they're not cobbled together. So that's worked out very well. We're making good progress on the elevator side and the boiler side from what we used to be. Are you able to see the presentation that I'm?
We were working on it.
Is it not?
I think the HDMI, let me check your connection. Drive this way.
I apologize. Technology. There we go. Okay. So hopefully that helps. All right, so that's the current organization, and yes, you have that copy there if you want to follow through. So this just gives you an idea of what we're dealing with. There's more than 600 separate fire departments in the state of Kansas. A large number of them are separately taxing entities, political subdivisions that are fire districts or townships where they're actually have separate taxing authority. We could go on about, you know, is this the best way that for our state and most economical way for us to provide fire protection? It is what we have. Not saying that someday I see that we will probably be going through what schools did in the 1970s and 60s and trying to consolidate some of these, because I think we're losing a lot of money on the administrative side of all these different entities. And like I just pointed out, the simple joint purchasing for equipment would be a great savings for everyone. All right, so we do have 4 primary divisions that do our operations. The first is our investigations division. This is staffed by 11 full-time law enforcement officers who are special agents of our office. Those, I should say, we would like to be staffed with 11. We have had a 20% vacancy rate for the past year. 2 of our 11 we have been unable to fill. And it's very frustrating because we're just not meeting market anymore. Law enforcement, as I'll talk about later, has changed very much in the last 5 years since 2020, and I'll kind of go through that. But basically, this organization, this group within, is an assisting agency for local fire departments. When your fire chief in your town, or that whatever it is, if not so much if you're in Wichita, but if you're in Ingalls, Kansas, for example, and you have a fire and you're not sure what caused that fire, or you're concerned about it, or there's some sort of, maybe it's the mayor's brother's house and you're concerned about optics, we are here to assist. So we come in and conduct those origin and cause investigations to determine the cause of that fire and make sure that there's no criminal nexus to it, okay? If we do find that there's an arson, then we investigate that, we prosecute it, and we go through. But in most cases, we're just there as an assisting agency for that local fire department, helping them do that investigation. And we do a large number of death investigations every year, as you can imagine, because of that, mainly, again, in the rural areas of our state. Wichita, Kansas City, and some of the Johnson County departments have their own programs where they have the people who are qualified at the same level that our folks are to do those investigations. But outside of those small areas, really, we're hauling the water in the state for these departments. So about 460, so we did have 464 investigative responses to fires were requested in the last year, and that includes 40 fatality investigations. We did add a new canine this year. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. One of the things we focused on this year was fireworks safety. So we had not had a presence, even though we have fireworks stands all over the state. We really hadn't been doing enforcement. And when I say enforcement, it's more compliance. Going out actually and just meeting with the stand owners, talking through the rules, making sure they're doing things correctly. They have enough exits, they have a fire extinguisher, that sort of thing. So we went out and contacted 361 stands this year and worked through them on different violations. By far the biggest issue we come across is fire extinguishers. Just us being present, though, I think we're going to gain more compliance and more safety with that. So we're just trying to be out there, more visible, and we didn't assess any fines or make any charges or anything like that. It's more of a learning process, and I actually enjoyed getting out around the state. I checked 50-some stands myself, and it was nice to go out and visit with people. We did add a new member of the department. This is Gator. Gator is a human remains detection canine. I hope none of you ever need it. But his job is to go into those fires, and if we have a missing person or missing people, to help us locate them in that fire, or if we have a major disaster event, such as they did down in Texas last summer, where they're looking for bodies who are in debris and everything else. This is the sort of thing that Gator brings us, and he's one of the only law enforcement certified human remains detection dogs in the state. So been very happy to see how welcome he's been brought in by law enforcement, and they have had a number of different missions where they've gone out and helped law enforcement look for potential dead bodies or that sort of thing in the communities or in the areas. So that's kind of a neat new thing. I know, kind of morbid, but if we can help a family put things to rest, we would really rather do that. So next division is Emergency Response Division. That is the group that really, with a very, very few state employees, we leverage a huge amount of resources across the state through contracts and through getting local firefighters to go on state missions. So we have, on the hazmat side, 9 regional hazmat teams across the state. Anytime they leave their area under our orders, we take on the responsibility for paying for their response, paying for their time, paying for the backfill of their jobs back in their town. So that when you're in a rural area and you're wondering where that's coming from, where these specialized technicians and all these $9,000 a piece suits, all the different things depending on the hazard, we provide that for the state. And if we didn't do that, about 95% of our state would not have that ability or would not have that service in place. So great program. It's been going for nearly 30 years, I think now, and very successful. The other side that we actually inherited in 2015, or it's 2017, I'm going to mess up the date, but it's been about 10 years. We inherited or were given the search and rescue program. So that includes if your area is hit by a tornado, if there's heavy damage, if you have a building collapse, if we have an grain elevator explosion with people trapped in the wreckage, that sort of thing. These are the folks that have the training and the equipment to come in and lift a building off of you or do whatever they have to do. And our intent with that is that they are able to fill and do that duty for the state of Kansas for the first 48 hours, knowing that federal assets and other assets are able to come in and backfill that. There are other teams at the federal level in FEMA, but if we can really focus on that first 48 hours and doing life-saving and as much as we can until those assets get here, we kind of fill that gap. The nice thing about that is we're also able to then, even though those assets are for Kansas, we're able to, when other states have disasters, we're able to provide some of that service to other states. So, 2 years ago, we sent folks to Florida and North Carolina after the hurricanes, and they were involved in rescues in the Tampa area and up in the mountains. And we sent folks just this last summer for 2 weeks down to the hill country of Texas after the horrible flooding there. And they worked diligently day after day trying to recover bodies and recover people. And it was a tough lift for them, but I'm really proud of what they did.
Just a quick question. You say you have 200 responders with local law enforcement. So do these folks come and train under your agency, or how do they get certified for this?
Yes, so there's roughly 200 between all these different agencies around the state. We sign memorandums of understanding with all of them. And basically what we do is reimburse their agency for their time if we take them to Texas, for example, or whatever it is. We do provide the training for them. It's generally provided out in Salina at Crisis City with the Adjutant General's Department. And we have rubble piles, if you haven't ever been out there, where we can actually go in and simulate collapses and go through and cut through concrete and do all those different things. So yes, we provide all that training in cooperation with the Kansas Fire and Rescue Training Institute also. Yeah. Just to show you, this is some other stuff. The pictures on the left that you see up there, that's from the actual deployment in Texas last summer. Some of our folks that were down there and working. The one on the right, we unfortunately had a farmer who was swept off his tractor into a river down in Labette County. And we sent resources down there and searched for days, trying again to find him. Never did locate him. Even though our folks put in a lot of time, as you can kind of see in that picture, they were literally lined up, body to body, going through that for miles downstream looking. And unfortunately, we weren't able to locate him. But a good effort by our folks. Did everything we we could. And the family was very, very appreciative. In fact, they insisted on feeding our folks every meal. We did have some other flooding. This is Strong City, Kansas. Just to give you an idea, we had to go in, and though it was fairly low flooding, had some folks that had chosen to remain in their homes and had to be brought out that were not able to extricate themselves. So one new thing that we've done in this, I think a lot of you have probably heard concerns about wildfire in the state of Kansas. And one of the problems we've faced is a lack of a way that we can reimburse or compensate volunteer fire departments for coming on state disaster missions. So in working with the Division of Emergency Management, we have rolled out basically the same sort of contracts that we do for search and rescue, and for hazmat, we are making available for fire resource response to local departments. And what we've done, so we don't get into the volunteer issues and everything there, is we have, they'll sign a contract for a flat rate. So if they have a brush truck and they provide 2 people on it and that equipment, we'll pay them, say, $200 an hour. And that's all based on national standards of pricing and that sort of thing. But at the end of that, from the time they leave their station to the time they go home, if they're given a state tasking to go, we will cut a check to them. And that comes out of our emergency response fund for all 3 of these different areas. And then we are actually reimbursed by KDEM out of disaster funds as long as there's a state disaster declared for that. So the majority of that money is reimbursed into our agency and comes out of the disaster funds. But this is one of the ways we're trying to free up resources for wildfires. And this is where we're sending resources, maybe 2 or 3 counties from where they normally are. And we're trying to incentivize them and compensate them because a lot of these small departments just don't have the money to spend on going, knowing that they're going to ruin a set of tires or whatever else. This helps, like I said, incentivize and then also hopefully support them in those roles. So that's something we're just rolling out. Pretty excited to see where it goes, and hopefully that will help us when we are asking for help as a state for one of our counties that's being hit hard. Prevention Division, this is our biggest division and the one you probably hear the most about. Our folks can conduct almost 14,000 inspections a year across the state. You know, a lot of those are routine, but then others are very complex because we get involved in and we are contracted through KDADs to provide the required Medicare and Medicaid inspections of facilities. And we do that at their request. And then Medicare, CMS takes it from there. That's a whole different level of training our folks have to do. It's we work under their rules, but that's just for those facilities that receive CMS funding. You have some of these numbers in front of you. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just give you an idea of just some of the things that our folks are accomplishing. And we're finding all kinds of crazy things out there. You know, nothing like going for the emergency fire exit and there's no exit bar to get out. Or you go to the hotel and realize the fire doors that are supposed to keep the fire and smoke at one part of the building versus the other have been removed because they're just inconvenient anymore. So we find all kinds of different things around the state. Industrial safety stays very, very busy. So 11,500 inspections there of boilers a year. We also have 8,000, roughly 8,500 elevators in the state now registered with us. That is still a growing program. We have not begun any enforcement whatsoever on the elevator side. What we're doing right now is just trying to get people to voluntarily comply, and we're still working through the rules and regs process to actually have an elevator safety code adopted, but again, we're facing the same problems there as we do with our fire code and everything else with these codes that are so large and complex. Getting them through the process and being reviewed by all the different agencies is nearly impossible. And we can talk more about that, or I'll speak more to the fire code issue here in a bit. So the volunteer fire grant, thank you. For those of you, the legislature provided us with $500,000 of SGF last year. We use that to buy the actual protective ensembles from the helmets to the boots of firefighters out there. and we do it on a needs basis. The department at the lowest annual budget that we gave funding or gave equipment to this year was $5,000 a year. That was their annual budget to run a fire department, okay? So it's been eye-opening to me to be working on this, and then also we have the president of the State Fire Chiefs Association, the president of the state firefighters, and we sit down with our staff and we go through these. There were 102 agencies that asked, and they asked for $2.6 million worth of equipment, right? But we look down into there, what are the most needs? And it's eye-opening to see how people are just barely making a way. And this is the basic safety equipment that these folks need to protect themselves so they can go home to their families later, so they're not going to get cancer, so they're not going to be burned, whatever else. And you'll see some pictures here just to give you an idea of all the different departments that received it and what that kind of looks like. They're very thankful for the support, and I appreciate that the legislature put into the base bills that funding to continue next year from the Fire Marshal Fee Fund. So let's talk about challenges we're facing real quick. Number one is we have the oldest fire code, and you guys have heard me say this same thing every year I stand up here. And I feel like we're actually starting to get some interest in it, because the longer we have this 2006 fire code in place, the more friction and problems you're going to hear out of your local partners and municipalities, because by ISO requirements, which is the Insurance Service Office that basically grades fire departments, and then they decide, the insurance industry decides how to set the insurance rates in a community, they are required by ISO to be on one of the last two versions of that code. So they have to be on the 18 or the 24 code by a certain period time. They have to keep that up. The state has let this go. We are on the 2006. We've got to figure out a way forward, and rules and regs, unfortunately, and we could have a long conversation about the problems. And this is not at the legislative, it's the process of getting to before the legislative committee. Now, to add to that, I will guarantee you any one of these codes that we're going to put in front of you is going to have an economic impact after we spend money on a study and bring people in on that is going to be over $1 million over a 5-year period. Okay, because these are regulations and rules that basically impact every place that people live, work, or gather for any purpose in the state other than 1- and 2-family homes. So in the end, it's going to have to come back to the legislature for a vote anyway. So what we would really like to see working with the fire service is find some way forward to where we can keep that updated and keep going to the newest way with the input of the legislature and everyone working together, but without having to go through the processes it is. And depending on other agencies whose priorities are not the same as ours on handling those rules and regulations. And I'd, again, be happy to talk offline with any of you if you want more information on that. We are working, hopefully, on the 2024. We're starting to get that information together. But again, we really have no way of adopting it in a reasonable amount of time. Okay, so that's out there, and I don't have a suggestion. Hopefully we can legislatively, maybe next session, new administration, we can look at some of these issues and we'll see where that is. I understand this year's not the year. Kyle did mention some of the challenges we're facing with law enforcement. So just to kind of set a base for you, and you probably heard this from other people who employ law enforcement officers, law enforcement changed in this country in 2020. And we don't have as many people willing to go into it. On top of that, we don't have as many people who are physically capable of doing the job. It's the same thing you're hearing from the military, right? So it's a buyer's market, right? It's a seller's market. It's if you are you've stayed clean, you have a clean record, you're not doing drugs, you're not smoking stuff, you're not whatever else, you've gone through all these different portions, and you're willing, and you're physically fit, and you're willing to go into law enforcement, you can write your own check today. So what makes it more difficult for us, we were before 2020, one of few agencies that brought people in what we call lateral entry, We require our special agents to have it, to be certified officers. We don't have any rookies. Certified officers who have at least 5 years of experience in law enforcement. Then we bring them in. But unfortunately, since now all the agencies are doing that, and so as you can kind of see up here what lateral entry looks like at 5 years from a lot of agencies across the state, we're able to offer them $62,700 to walk in the door. And if you look right above that, there is what an entry-level recruit going to the Highway Patrol Academy is getting, is $61,800. Within a very short period of time, that trooper is making $68,000, right? And I'm not saying it's all the Highway Patrol. These are all the different departments that we're trying to go and we are recruiting against. We have a position in Southwest Kansas open and has been open for the near part of a year that I cannot get qualified applicants to even come in the door to talk with us. So what our ask is, can we get to a place where we have our folks, and I'm not asking for above or anything else, but if we can get to a pay parity and put them on the plan that we've built for law enforcement, that would allow us to hire and retain folks. There was a time when we at our agency, 3 of our folks were troopers who came to work for us in the years, right? We used to work for Highway Patrol. We have fallen so far from where that is today. The other part of that is our folks are KP&F, so they're on that shorter time span for career, and they're on a pay system that's built for an employee who stays on for the capers time. So again, that's one of the things about that progression. So what we're asking there is it's $294,000 if we do it this year to put that in place. That gives you an idea how far we are when you're talking about 11 people. Now that does include fringe, the different portions of that, but would bring us to a point where we're marketable. That goes to, I believe, $300,000 in the following year. Now, if we put that off to that next year, it would be that $300,000 amount. That's something, we can talk about. I understand we're already halfway through 2026's budget, and but I wanted to put this out there and be a main point of all the things we ask for. Once we get past the volunteer firefighters, this is our major priority for our agency, because this is the only way we're going to be able to maintain that service to these rural fire departments. We have no coverage in Southwest Kansas right now. My nearest people are coming from the Wichita area, or they're coming from up in Colby. So we'd really like, for example, to fill that, and I think those areas deserve that coverage. This is interesting. So you saw that we asked for money to hire a new inspector to take care of inspections specifically related to Kansas State University, but also pick up some of the Board of Regents. We are statutorily obligated to inspect every school, college, and university building in the state. We have the ability when we get down into schools and colleges, if they're not state property, to where we can sign MOUs with local agencies for them to do that. The problem with state property is, as you're probably aware, local codes and standards do not apply on state property, so that local inspector has no authority to do an inspection on state property or enforce the fire code on the state property. So as a result of that, the legislature in 2009 created a Commission Inspector Act, and basically that was a way of cutting costs to the state by allowing the universities to have their own qualified people that are already on staff do their fire inspections themselves on our behalf in a cooperative measure. And so 4 of the universities took us up on that: Wichita State, University of Kansas, K-State, and Pittsburgh State University. And so that's been a great program. During COVID, at some point in there, Kansas State University decided they no longer wanted to do that. So that's another 700 buildings that our department has had to start trying to figure out, that without really any notice, how to cover a year. And they're sprinkled, of course, all over the state. So last year, for example, we spent $58,000 just on travel, pulling other people away from their other duties to try to cover those inspections at K-State. So here's what I'm asking. It's one of two, and you know, the chairman's aware of my thoughts on this. It's two things. Either we incentivize or K-State to continue doing the inspections. They already have the staff there. Or we're going to need another body to do those inspections they're not doing. The frustrating thing is a job that was done by one state employee before now requires two, because our inspector does not know their campus, does not know their buildings, doesn't have the keys. So now it takes two people walking around to do the job that one did several years ago, and it's a little bit frustrating. So the first year cost, I think this came up as a question earlier, of 116, that includes the pay and fringe, which was $78,190 for a starting inspector, and the equipment for that first year. So that's a vehicle, that's all the computers, that's the different tools they use and carry. So that's the startup cost basically of a new position. And then that drops to the second year approximately $80,000, depending on what the state pay plan does and what the legislature moves things around, right? But that first year that's what that includes. That's why it's higher that first year. All right, IT. And I won't go into this a whole lot. I think we all realize the IT challenges we're facing. We recently brought in a new IT director from outside of the state service who has awesome background in IT. And what he found when he came in is we're 10 to 15 years in technology behind. We've lagged. Our folks got a little complacent, they got too comfortable, and we are dealing with a lot of outdated technology, and there's a lot of opportunities for us we should be using. So as we put those in place, we have more devices, we have more tablets out. Our folks are not doing inspections on paper, they're doing them on tablets. It'll go through a system. We're wanting to do plan review that way. There's a lot of things we want to try to do to make things more streamlined and more customer friendly. But we're limited on staff. So this would basically bring in an entry-level IT person who can handle basic setup of devices and management of devices, and who can also then handle the help desk stuff. So our staff that are more experienced can then actually work on updating and doing the things that need to be done so we can move forward instead of just maintaining what we have. We have one staff member whose job right now is we have multiple programs that are no longer supported by their companies that we are using that are obsolete, that we are limping along using, and we need to get out of them. And hopefully, you know, that'll open up some room later on. But just to give you an idea, we have one person who's just sticking a Band-Aid on stuff every day and using stuff just to try to move forward. So that is an $87,000 ask, and that's base and fringe. We mentioned the $150,000 for a study. Since the time that we put our budgets in last July. And so what we found is after we already put that in, we found a savings in our own budget to cover that. So we are not asking for that $150,000 in 2006 for the study. And then I think that was about it. Obviously, the $500,000 is already in your budget, so that ask is gone. But those are the three things that really we're looking at. If we can get that enhancement, it would help us. It's all not SGF. It's all from the Fire Marshal Fee Fund and the other fee funds that we manage, and we would take care of those different items. And I will stand for questions, sir.
Thank you. Previous to when we did the $500,000 last year for those grants, were you able to help out the volunteer firefighters? Did you do this in previous years without the grants?
So before that, my predecessor had worked out with the legislature to get permission to use $400,000 a year from the Fire Marshal Fee Fund for this purpose. What we were looking at when we came last year, we were hoping to spark the conversation of how do we long-term support this. I understand it seemed like the right time and things were good and things are not so good right now. And I understand that with SGF. So I understand we can probably, for a few years, we can use some of that overage in the Fire Marshal Fee Fund for that purpose. comfortably before we get to the point where we're at a minimum and we need to look at how else we as a state can support that.
Any questions for the fire marshal? Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. I just have one quick question on the page where you're talking about challenges we're facing and the universities. What's happened to Emporia State and Fort Hays State?
So
Are they doing their own, or are you guys doing?
Nope, Emporia State and Fort Hays State do we do theirs, but when we look at the university system, it's much easier for us to deal with the Fort Hays campus and the size of it rather than what K-State has across the state. Because remember, we're talking about every building at one of their research farms has to be, every building, all over the place. Their campus in Olathe has to be, we have to inspect. So that's where, if KU did the same thing to us, I'd be in the same position going, I don't know how we do this and then still keep up with the other statutory requirements that we have. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Bloom.
Mr. Chair, thanks. Mr. Ingholm, nice to see you again. I know we talked this fall about the rural firefighters that have gone broke because of all the fires, and you guys trying to help them out. You can do like the clothing and stuff like that, but you can't do the operating expense, right? That has to come from the commissioners. Because where they're broke, they can't buy the fuel and the stuff like that.
Yeah, so if I may, for the committee, what we're referring to is some of the departments in Representative Bloom's district have a great amount of state property, state leased property in it that's wildland, and it caught fire several years ago on the north end of Tuttle Creek Lake, and it's kind of a unique situation in the state.
Every year thing.
Yeah, it's an every year thing, and it goes all the way back to the floods of '93. When a lot of debris was washed down into that area, a lot of trees and stuff, and it's really wild area. But these local fire departments are basically on it's federal property leased by the state of Kansas, and they spent their whole budget for the year as a local fire department fighting those fires. And so Representative Bloom and I apologize, the other representative have been working very hard to try to locate a way to help those departments, especially since it is land that it is under the control of the state of Kansas, to try to help them put themselves back. But no, I don't have any authority to spend money like that to provide.
You can buy the protective vest.
I can buy them the protective gear. We can go out and help them in that instance. If they call like they did up there, when the county emergency manager up there says, our firefighters are bushed, they can't do any more, we need help from the state, we arranged for fire departments from around Kansas to send fire trucks and personnel up there to help fight that fire. But as far as actually providing money for local operations for their budget, no, I don't have any way.
I found out it would have to come from the commissioners. And of course, all the counties, they don't want to spend extra money, and it's a real problem. Thank you so much.
I agree. It is a problem, and I'm glad you're working on it.
Any further questions? All right, I just have one. Do you know how many FTEs you have that are open?
So I believe as of today, is it 4? It's either 4 or 5.
Okay, and you can get that information after.
Yeah, I'll get that.
Okay.
It is either 4 or 5. 2 investigative, and I want to say we have three positions open. We did have to, you'll see there's kind of a weird number in there. It shows 80 employees, and we actually have 76 FTEs just like we did before. But there was a change in the policy of the state dealing with contract employees, and so we had to move some contract employees who were doing maintenance work for us and things like that to 999 positions. So that's where there are 3 positions that you'll see on our org chart that didn't exist before as 999s.
Very good. Any further questions? Representative Delperding.
Thank you, appreciate that. Just looking at the $500,000 grant, and I see it's for protective equipment kits and so forth, but what about for equipment you don't think about? They come back from a fire. Is there washing machines and stuff at these facilities? What's it cost to upgrade these? Are we keeping them, or they have to go out and purchase their own? Or
So the grant this year, and we've kind of adjusted. So this year, with feedback from the Fire Chiefs Association, we did do what they're called gear extractors. They're heavy-duty washing machines that can take these, when it's wet, 100 pounds of material and wash it and decontaminate it. So we did purchase 4 of those. In the past, our office did have those in the program, and we purchased, I want to say, 30 or 40 of those around the state. So that is an option for them to ask for that. But I will tell you that my priority, and we will also buy wildland gear, for example. We bought structural gear, wildland gear, and those. Our priority is making sure that I don't have to, like I have the last 2 years, have to go out and talk to badly burned volunteer firefighters who were at fires and did not have the proper protective gear that wasn't furnished by their local agency. And in one case, and by the way, they're both in their 60s and 70s. These are volunteers who are serving their communities out there, good people. And I'm just going to go off just for a second because this is, to me, one of those examples of service that we don't hear about often. But this firefighter up there, this community rallied and raised money for him while he was in the burn unit at KU. He had 3rd-degree burns, horrible. When he came home, his family, and he took all that money and spent it on buying wildland gear for his fire department. So those are the kind of people we have out there. Anytime you start feeling like, society's going the wrong direction or whatever else, there's some good out there that I hope we're looking at.
so what kind of if I may, what kind of a lifespan does that have? How often does the equipment need replaced?
Yeah, so the national standard is 10 years. So that gear, unless it gets damaged, unless it, burns up, 10 years is what we're looking at, and we try not to do it. We have a lot of it out there that's more than 10 years old, I'll tell you that.
So what's the total number of volunteer departments that you supply?
Well, in this case,
Just approximate.
There's roughly 16,000 firefighters in the state of Kansas. 90% of them are volunteers, and the vast majority of the fire departments in Kansas are volunteer departments. Now, we get a little bit of a gray area there because there's also what they call combination departments. Derby, Kansas is a great example of that. They have 27 full-time staff, but they also have 25 volunteers also. So we have some departments that are kind of combination like that versus Wichita, that it would be a fully career department, or Osage City, where I served for a while back in the day, is still to this day 100% volunteer.
So is there some option other than have to each year or so often to come and ask us for grants? Is there a way to get a permanent fund in place?
That would be something I'd love to talk to you about. I think there are some ideas out there of what that might look like, a permanent funding stream and a permanent program. So we didn't have to discuss it every year, but it would take legislative action. But there are some pretty good ideas out there about it.
I'm all ears.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, not seeing anything further. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, sir. All right, that will close the budget hearing on the State Fire Marshal. We will open the budget hearing on the Adjutant General's office. Go back to Kyle.
Try and not get the cart before the horse this time. We're going to move to the Adjutant General's Department. So the Adjutant General's Department is the overseer of the National Guard and a lot of the emergency management here in the state. The table there on page 1 breaks down the overall expenditures of the agency. As you can see, the fiscal year 26 approved number from SB 125 is $95.7 or $8 million. Fiscal year 26 revised request is an increase of about $5.5 million to $101.3 million. And the request for fiscal year 27 is about $3 million over the approved at $98.5 million. The two pie charts there, the SGF portion of the agency's budget is roughly $14.4 million, or a little under 1% of the state's SGF portion. And similarly, their all funds portion of $101.3 million is also a little under 1% of the state budget. Turning to page 2, the snapshot tables here include the two enhancement requests for fiscal year 2027, as well as the disaster funding reappropriation for fiscal year 2026. The reappropriation of disaster funds would be $2.6 million, and the disaster funding for fiscal year 2027 is $15.1 million in federal funds and $2 million in SGF funds. As with many of the rest of the budgets, the state building construction removal of supplementals and enhancements has currently removed both of those items. Page number 3 is the 10-year history. The peak there for fiscal year 2025 is largely due to state aid. If you turn to page 4, the green line, the peak there is associated with the state aid increase for that. And then the categorized spending is on page 5 with more details on page 6. The federal state aid and federal and state aid is outlined in the tables on page 7. Due to the disaster relief and reimbursement programs, the agency does have a substantial portion of its budget in state aid. The program basis of the agency is broken out on page 8 for the per program expenditures and FTE positions. And page 9 breaks down the expenditures by fund from the agency. The main fee fund for the agency is their general fees fund, the explanation for which is at the bottom of page 9 there, and it receives a contribution for communications on wheels from KDOT, a 9/11 coordinator, expenses from the state 911 board, and tax credits for armory renovations, the Fusion Center analyst, and rental incomes. The actual breakdown of how those monies work is on the table on page 10. And page 11 begins our actual breakdown of the fiscal year 26 and 27 budgets. As with the state fire marshal, item number 1 there is the SB 125 approved number of $3.2 million. 2 of the contributions therein, the disaster funding was increased by $19.6 million from $20 million to $39.1 million for disaster reimbursement expenses, and a increase of $500,000 was added by the legislature last year to compensate for federal cuts to the Department of Emergency Management funding. Item number 2, again, from the snapshot table on page 2, is the SGF reappropriation of disaster funds. And these are funds from fiscal year 2025 that did not actually get dispersed for their reimbursement in fiscal year 25 and carry into fiscal year 26. And again, the HB 2434 position currently removes those reappropriations. Item number 3 is an increase of $15.1 million for contractual services. This is predominantly for their cellular and communication protocols, as well as their professional services, which includes things like engineers, architects, accountants for auditing purposes, and any legal expenses. Item number 4 is a capital improvements funding increase of $9.5 million, and this is predominantly associated with repairs to the Nickel Hall facility in Salina that has shifted off its foundation. Item number 5 is an increase of $311 for salaries and wages, and including $1.7 million of SGF. The reason for the disconnect of those two numbers is that there's a little bit of a rearrangement of how things are being, or what funds are being diverted and used for the salaries and wages in fiscal year 26 from the original approved submission. Item number 6 is an increase of capital outlays for $378,950, including a decrease of $509,588 SGF. So as with the previous line, the SGF funds are effectively, some of those funds are being diverted from the capital outlay decreases to salaries and wages, while other funds are being shifted around. Item number 7 is a decrease of $1.6 million in commodities purchases, including $848,440 SGF. And this is predominantly associated with reduction in buildings and ground expenses and gasoline purchases, as well as some office supplies. Item number 8 is aid to locals, a decrease of $18.5 million. And that is associated with anticipated reduced reimbursement for disaster recovery. Item number 9 is an all funds increase of $72,117, including a decrease of $307,883 and a half an FTE position associated with qualified organization aid, distributions, and disaster emergency mitigation. The FTE is a realignment of positions across the agency programs. Any questions for fiscal year 26?
Any questions for 26 for Kyle? Let's go to 27.
Moving to page 13, fiscal year 27. The first line of the table there is again the fiscal year 26 non-reappropriated approval number of $93.2 million. Item number 1 is the disaster funding enhancement that was shown in snapshot 2 for $17.1 million. That includes $2 million in SGF and $15.1 million in corresponding federal matching funds. Item number 2 is contractual services increase of $15.3 million, including a $181,616 decrease of SGF funding. And that is similar to fiscal year 26, largely associated with the cellular and communications contracts, professional services, and building operational costs. Item number 3 is an increase of $871,692, including $1.5 million SGF for salaries and wages. And as with 2026, the disconnect between the all funds and SGF numbers associated with a rearrangement of how things are being funded. Item number 4 is an increase of $380,200, including $200 SGF for other assistance, and this is aid that gets distributed to qualified organizations for emergency mitigation practices. Item number 5 is an increase of $378,950, including a decrease of $509,588 SGF for capital outlay expenditures associated with office furniture. Item number 6 is a all funds decrease of $1.6 million, including a decrease of $848,436 SGF for decreases predominantly, again, in materials for building and grounds, as well as gasoline and office supplies. Item number 7 is a decrease of $2 million for capital improvements, and this is predominantly associated with reduction in projects outside of their recurring rehabilitation and repair, as well as offsets for increases for the new restoration and modernization project. Item number 8 is an all funds decrease of $25 million for aid to locals. And again, that has to do with anticipated reductions in disaster recovery reimbursements. And last but not least is item number 9, all other adjustments, increase of $118,119 SGF and a decrease of half an FTE position. Again, the half FTE position readjustment is reorganization of how the FTE positions are assigned throughout the agency. Any questions for fiscal year 27?
Any questions on 27? All right. Thank you very much, Kyle. We will move on to the agency. Lieutenant Colonel, welcome to committee.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Keith Marshall with the Adjutant General's Department. I'm the legislative liaison. Brigadier General Schneider sends his regrets that he was not able to join us this afternoon. He's out in Washington, D.C., working with our federal partners out there. I'm going to do a quick agency overview, but then I'm going to center my testimony around the base House Appropriations budget bill and tell you what we need that is not in that bill. So our agency consists of the Kansas Army and Air National Guard, the Kansas Division of Emergency Management, or KDEM, the Kansas Office of Homeland Security, Kansas Intelligence Fusion Center, and the Kansas Wing of the Civil Air Patrol. So those are the elements of our agency, and together we're really the state's unified emergency management and homeland security enterprise. We coordinate the state's response to disasters, emergencies, and homeland security threats. We support all 105 counties across Kansas and the first responders in those counties. So our mission spans preparedness, response, recovery, mitigation, communications, as well as continuity of government. So our major components of the Kansas National Guard, which at the state level mission provides military support to civil authorities during disasters. It supports search and rescue, logistics, aviation, security, damage assessment, and other missions across the state. KDEM leads statewide emergency preparedness functions, response and recovery. They coordinate disaster declarations with the state and federal governments, do resource requests, and coordinate federal reimbursements as well. They support counties with planning, training, exercises, and technical assessments. And then the Homeland Security and Fusion Center, their mission is to coordinate threat prevention, try to get out ahead of the threats that are happening in the state, do intelligence sharing with our partners, and critical infrastructure protection. They work with federal, state, and local partners to try to reduce risks to Kansas communities. And then the Civil Air Patrol, we have budgetary oversight over them, but not like direct control operationally, if you will. They provide aerial search and rescue, disaster imagery, emergency communications during time of disaster. They're a volunteer force that supports both state and federal missions. So the key to all this is all emergency management originates at the local level. They are the ones that are primarily tasked with responding to incidents that happen in their communities. Then when a community is overwhelmed, that's when they reach out to us, and we're kind of the state's surge capacity, if you will. And then also FEMA is above us to provide additional help, but when FEMA delays things or steps back, then we have to step in and fill the gap as a state agency. So when Kansas call for help, whether it's wildfires, tornadoes, floods, winter storm that could happen this weekend, our organization is one of the key ones that is stepping up and answering that call. So getting into our requests from the committee and from appropriations, we have two lapses in reappropriations that I'm going to address and then one enhancement request. The first lapse is in our disaster relief fund. The bill lapse is $2.14 million. This is matching funds that are awaiting federal reimbursement. So Kansas has $17.4 million sitting at FEMA, waiting to be reimbursed back to the state of Kansas. It's kind of stuck in a national backlog due to FEMA's regulatory requirements. In particular, Homeland Security Secretary Noem implemented a policy where she has to personally approve all expenditures over $100,000. So our $17.4 million is entirely caught up in that backlog. As soon as she signs that and approves that, then that money will flow back to us, and we will owe our matching component to that, which will encompass all of that lapsed amount that it's showing in that bill. So these are our reimbursements to our county, our local agencies that have already experienced a disaster. They've already completed the reconstruction projects, the disaster relief. They've submitted for reimbursement and are just waiting on that payment from FEMA, and then we will match that as a state when that reimbursement happens. So in your packets, I put a quick snapshot of just a few of those projects specifically, so you can kind of understand what those projects are. I won't go through all of them, but just a couple of examples. Topeka Public Works is waiting on a $4.3 million reimbursement for water and sewer system damage, repair following a winter storm in January 2024. The city of Newton is waiting on a reimbursement of almost $350,000 for debris removal following severe storms in May of 2024. So that's kind of what these projects are for when we say we're waiting on reimbursement and who that money is going to go to eventually. So those are to entities around the state in all of your districts, and it's really important for them to eventually get that reimbursement. Number 2 on our list is for the Office of Emergency Communications. There's a $299,000 lapse showing in the bill. This is just simply an administrative error that occurred. So the Office of Emergency Communication is kind of the backbone of our state communications system. They do the interoperable radio systems, they do disaster communication planning, technical support to counties and first responders. That unspent balance, we were paying these people, we were operating this function. Our agency went without a comptroller for several months, and so a normal transfer from one account to another just didn't occur, and that's why it's showing that the money is unspent. So we were paying everyone and spending money on operations out of our SGF account. The comptroller would then normally transfer the funds out of the Office of Emergency Communication account at the end of the year, and since that office was vacant, that transfer never occurred. So it showed that money was not spent, when in reality the money was spent. And then, Mr. Chairman, number 3 is an enhancement request that we have. So many of KDEM's operating expenses and salaries are funded by a FEMA grant called the Emergency Management Performance Grant Program. So the notice of funding opportunity went out for this in 2024, and it was supposed to cover the period of 2024 to 2027. So it's a 3-year grant. This fall, when the grant was actually awarded, FEMA had cut out of the first year of that grant. So the performance period of October of 24 to September of 25 was completely removed from the grant, and that was money that KDEM was expecting to have for reimbursements of those operating expenses and those salaries. This is not just a Kansas issue. This happened to all 50 states who are involved in this grant program. 12 states did sue FEMA and the federal government over this. That lawsuit is still in litigation. Kansas was not a party to that, so even if it resolves in the plaintiff's favor, there's no guarantee that we would see any of that money in Kansas, since we're not a plaintiff to that lawsuit. It's important to note that this just created a 1-year gap in the program. They did fund 2025. They did fund 2026. There is proposed funding in appropriations bills for 2027 at the federal level for this. There are a couple of guardrails that are being talked about putting in place so this doesn't happen again in the future at the federal level. There's a provision in the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill that's before Congress right now that would prevent this type of thing from happening again. So we're really hoping that this is just a one-time hiccup and we don't have to come back and ask for money for this again. But as of right now, it did create a pretty significant gap in KDEM's budget. this also contains money that is passed through from KDEM to the counties. So of that $4 million, $2.5 million would go to KDEM for their operating expenses and salaries. The other $1.5 million would go to the counties because they also use it for their operations and salaries for emergency management. So there's several counties around the state that are experiencing a pretty big hole in their budget, not having that grant money that they expected. So in closing, Mr. Chairman, these requests not only ensure that Kansas remains relevant and ready to respond to disasters today, but tomorrow. You know, we're always trying to prepare for the future. We know as Kansans that these disasters are going to happen. So as a state, we have to be as prepared for them as we possibly can be. This committee and this legislature have been very supportive of us in past years. We really appreciate your support for everything our agency does across our National Guard, emergency management, homeland security functions, and look forward to working with you together now and in the future to keeping Kansas safe and secure. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much. So looking at page 2 of your handout on the FEMA reimbursement, so our portion's $2.32 million, and the reappropriation was $2.1 million. So prior to the directive from Secretary Noem, would these have all been expensed and you would have had zero reappropriation if this directive wasn't in place?
Correct, yes. I think the first reimbursements that are held up were submitted back in September, and in the past, those would have been reimbursed immediately. So, yes, we would have expected to have seen that money by now.
Any further questions? All right, you might get off easy today. Really appreciate it. Thanks so
Thank you, Mr.
much.
Chairman.
All righty, that will close the budget hearing on the Adjutant General's office, and that will finish up today. If there's no comments from the committee, we will be back tomorrow. We're adjourned.
Second, the state fire marshal question.
Go ahead, Kyle.
So the question about commodities for clothing for the state fire marshal. The fire marshal partially addressed it, but to alleviate any confusion in how the actual table works, I read the table wrong when I was answering the question. So on page 4, the $500,000 in state aid for the approved number shows up separated in its own categorization. Because those expenditures actually went to the protective equipment, in the agency's revised request, they group in with the clothing. So your question about the grants being the associated cause was in fact correct.
Very good. Thank you, and we are adjourned.